Mark Johnson stood on the front porch of his new house holding a cup of coffee and watching the sun rise over Maple Ridge Estates. Everything looked perfect. The grass was green and cut exactly right. The houses all had fresh paint and clean driveways. Kids rode their bikes on the sidewalks while their parents waved from front yards. It was like living inside a picture book. "This is it, buddy," Mark said to himself, taking a deep breath of the morning air. We finally made it. He and his wife Sarah had dreamed of this moment for 5 long years. They had saved every penny they could while living in a tiny apartment across town. Mark worked as a computer programmer, spending long hours fixing code and building websites. Sarah was in the Navy, which meant she was often away from home for months at a time. But they both knew that one day they would have enough money to buy a real house in a nice neighborhood. The house wasn't huge, but it was theirs. 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a small kitchen, and a living room with big windows that let in lots of sunlight. The backyard was just the right size for a garden and maybe a dog someday. Mark loved how quiet it was compared to their old apartment, where they could hear every footstep from the people upstairs. When they first looked at houses in Maple Ridge Estates, the real estate agent told them about the Homeowners Association. "It's really great," she had said with a big smile. "They keep everything looking beautiful and organized. There are just a few simple rules to follow, nothing too complicated." Mark remembered meeting Margaret Thornfield, the HOA president, on moving day. She was a woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled back tight and glasses that made her eyes look bigger. She wore a blue dress and carried a clipboard, which she seemed to hold like it was very important. "Welcome to our community," Mrs. Thornfield had said, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm sure you'll find our neighborhood standards very reasonable. We just ask that everyone follows the rules, so we can all enjoy living here." She handed Mark a thick booklet with all the HOA rules. "Please read this carefully," she said. "The rules cover everything from lawn care to paint colors to where you can park your car. We find that when everyone follows the same guidelines, our property values stay high and everyone is happy." Mark had flipped through the booklet quickly. Most of it seemed normal enough. Keep your grass cut. Don't leave trash cans out too long. Don't paint your house bright purple. Nothing that seemed too hard to follow. "My wife is deployed with the Navy right now," Mark had told Mrs. Thornfield. "She'll be back in about 6 months. Is there anything special we need to know about military families?" Mrs. Thornfield's expression had changed slightly, though Mark couldn't quite figure out what the look meant. "The rules apply to everyone equally," she had said. "Military service doesn't change anything. We expect all residents to maintain the same standards." At the time, Mark had thought that was fair. Rules should be the same for everyone, right? He had thanked Mrs. Thornfield and promised to read the booklet carefully. For the first few weeks, everything was wonderful. Mark set up his home office in the spare bedroom where he could work on his computer while looking out at the street. He liked watching the neighbors go about their daily routines. There was Mr. Peterson, who walked his golden retriever every morning at exactly 7 o'clock. Mrs. Chen tended to her flower garden each evening after work. The Martinez family had 3 kids who played basketball in their driveway almost every afternoon. Mark tried to be a good neighbor. He introduced himself to people when he saw them outside. He offered to help Mr. Peterson when he saw him struggling with heavy grocery bags. He complimented Mrs. Chen on her beautiful roses. When the Martinez kids' basketball rolled into his yard, he always threw it back with a smile. Every evening, Mark would video call Sarah on his computer. She was stationed on a ship somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, and the time difference meant they usually talked late at night for him and early morning for her. "How's our house?" Sarah would always ask, her face pixelated on the computer screen, but her smile still bright. "Perfect," Mark would tell her, turning the laptop so she could see different rooms. "I mowed the lawn yesterday. The neighbors are really nice. Mrs. Chen gave me some tomatoes from her garden." Sarah would tell him about life on the ship, the different countries they visited, and how much she missed sleeping in a real bed instead of a narrow bunk. But she was proud of her work and the importance of her mission. "I can't wait to come home and see our house in person," she would say. "It's going to be so nice to have a real kitchen where I can cook dinner for you." Mark loved these conversations. Even though Sarah was thousands of miles away, talking to her each night made the house feel like a real home instead of just a building where he lived alone. The first month passed peacefully. Mark established a routine of working during the day, taking walks around the neighborhood in the evening, and maintaining their property exactly like the HOA booklet suggested. He kept the grass cut short and even. He made sure the trash cans were only outside on collection day. He washed his car in the driveway every weekend and kept it looking clean. Some neighbors started to know him better. Mrs. Chen invited him over for dinner one evening, serving delicious Chinese food while asking about Sarah's deployment. Mr. Peterson let Mark pet his dog and shared stories about his own military service during the Vietnam War. "Your wife is doing important work," Mr. Peterson had said. "People like her keep the rest of us safe. You should be proud." Mark was proud. He loved telling people about Sarah's job and how smart and brave she was. He kept a photo of her in her Navy uniform on his desk where he could see it while he worked. The neighborhood association held a barbecue at the community park during Mark's second month there. He brought potato salad and spent the afternoon talking with other residents. Everyone seemed friendly and normal. Kids ran around playing games while adults chatted about work, weather, and weekend plans. Mrs. Thornfield was there too, still carrying her clipboard and taking notes about something. She smiled and nodded when people talked to her, but Mark noticed she spent a lot of time writing things down instead of just enjoying the party. "What does she write about all the time?" Mark asked Mrs. Chen quietly. Mrs. Chen glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "She keeps track of everything," she whispered. "Every rule, every violation, every complaint. Some people think she takes it too seriously, but most of us just try to stay out of her way." Mark felt a small worry in his stomach, but he pushed it away. He was following all the rules. He had nothing to worry about. Everything was perfect in their new neighborhood, and soon Sarah would be home to enjoy it with him. He had no idea that his perfect life was about to become a nightmare. Mark was drinking his morning coffee when he saw the white envelope stuck to his front door. His name was written on it in neat handwriting, and there was an official stamp from the Maple Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. "That's weird," Mark said to himself, opening the envelope. He had been living in the neighborhood for 3 months now, and this was the first official letter he had received. Inside was a violation notice. Mark read it twice, thinking he must be making a mistake. According to the letter, he had violated Section 4.2 of the HOA rules by parking his car in the driveway instead of inside the garage. The fine was $50 and he had 10 days to pay it. Mark looked out at his driveway where his blue Honda sat exactly where he had parked it the night before. Then he looked around the street. Mr. Peterson's truck was in his driveway. Mrs. Chen's small car was in her driveway. The Martinez family had 2 cars in their driveway. Almost every house on the street had at least 1 car parked outside the garage. "This has to be a mistake," Mark said, walking to his computer to call the HOA office. The phone rang 4 times before someone answered. "Maple Ridge Estates, HOA. This is Janet." "Hi, this is Mark Johnson from Oak Street. I got a violation notice about parking in my driveway, but I see other people doing the same thing. I think there might be a mistake." There was a pause. "Hold on, let me check your file." Mark heard papers shuffling. "No mistake, Mr. Johnson. Mrs. Thornfield personally reported your violation yesterday evening." Mark felt confused. "But other people park in their driveways too. Why am I the only one getting a ticket?" "I can only tell you about your own violation, sir. If you have questions about the notice, you can attend the next board meeting or speak with Mrs. Thornfield directly." Mark hung up the phone, feeling frustrated. He decided to talk to Mrs. Thornfield in person to clear up the confusion. He found her house number in the neighborhood directory and walked 3 blocks to her street. Mrs. Thornfield answered the door wearing the same serious expression she always had. "Mr. Johnson, what can I do for you?" "I got this violation notice about my car," Mark said, holding up the paper. "I was wondering if there was some mistake because I see other people parking in their driveways all the time." Mrs. Thornfield looked at him like he had said something stupid. "Mr. Johnson, the rules clearly state that cars should be parked in garages when possible. Just because other people break the rules doesn't mean you should too. But if it's a rule for everyone, shouldn't everyone get tickets?" We address violations as we become aware of them, Mrs. Thornfield said. Some residents have been here longer and have established relationships. You're new, so we're making sure you understand our standards from the beginning. Mark felt his face getting hot. Are you saying you're treating me differently because I'm new? I'm saying military families sometimes think they don't have to follow the same rules as everyone else, Mrs. Thornfield said, her voice getting colder. But this is a community, and everyone needs to do their part. Mark was shocked. Where had that comment about military families come from? My wife is serving our country. That doesn't mean we think we're above the rules. Of course not, Mrs. Thornfield said, but her tone suggested she didn't believe him. Just make sure you read the handbook carefully and follow all the guidelines. We want everyone to be happy here. Mark walked home feeling angry and confused. He moved his car into the garage and decided to be extra careful about following every single rule in the HOA book, but the violations kept coming. 2 weeks later, another white envelope appeared on his door. This time the violation was for putting his trash can out too early. According to the notice, trash cans could only be placed at the curb after 6 p.m. the night before collection, and Mark had put his out at 5:30 p.m. Mark stared at the paper. 30 minutes early. A $50 fine for being 30 minutes early with his trash can. He looked up and down the street. Several neighbors had their trash cans out already, and it was only 4 p.m. But somehow only his can was a problem. The third violation came a week later. Mark had planted some small flowers along his front walkway, choosing bright yellow marigolds, because Sarah loved yellow. The violation notice said his flower choice violated the natural color palette guidelines outlined in Section 7.3 of the handbook. Mark flipped through the handbook until he found Section 7.3. It was 2 pages of complicated language about maintaining visual harmony and avoiding disruptive color schemes. Nowhere did it specifically say yellow flowers were banned, but apparently Mrs. Thornfield had decided they didn't fit the neighborhood's look. That evening, Mark called Sarah earlier than usual. When her face appeared on the computer screen, he could see she was tired. Hey, beautiful, Mark said, trying to sound normal. How was your day? Long, Sarah said with a small smile. We had training exercises all morning, but seeing your face always makes things better. How are things at home? Mark hesitated. He had been getting violation notices for 3 weeks now, but he didn't want to worry Sarah while she was so far away. She had enough stress dealing with her military duties. Everything's fine, he said. The house is great. The neighbors are mostly nice. Sarah knew him too well. What does mostly nice mean? Is someone bothering you? It's just the HOA lady, Mark said carefully. She's very strict about the rules. I got a couple of small violations for stupid things like parking in the driveway. Sarah's expression changed. What kind of violations? Are they costing us money? Mark didn't want to lie to his wife, but he also didn't want to upset her. Just some small fines, nothing I can't handle. Mark, how much money are we talking about? $150 so far, Mark admitted. But I'm being more careful now. It should be fine. Sarah looked worried. That's a lot of money. For parking violations. Is this woman targeting you for some reason? I don't know, Mark said. Maybe she just doesn't like new people, or maybe... He stopped himself. Maybe what? Mark took a deep breath. She made a comment about military families thinking they don't have to follow rules. I think she might have a problem with you being in the Navy. Sarah's face went hard. She said what? It might not mean anything. Mark said quickly. I could be wrong. Mark, if someone is harassing you because I'm in the military, that's not okay. That's actually illegal in some cases. I don't want to make trouble, Mark said. I just want to live peacefully in our house until you come home. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Keep track of everything, she finally said. Every violation notice, every conversation, every fine. Write it all down with dates and times. If this gets worse, we might need that information. Mark nodded, but inside he hoped it wouldn't get worse. He had no idea that Mrs. Thornfield was just getting started. Over the next month, the violations came faster. His garden gnome was inappropriate decoration. His American flag was hung at the wrong angle. His grass was half an inch too long in one corner of the yard. Each notice came with a $50 fine and language about community standards and property values. Mark started to feel like he was being watched all the time. He would see Mrs. Thornfield's friend Helen looking out her window with binoculars, writing things down in a notebook. Other neighbors who used to wave and smile now avoided eye contact when he walked by. The friendly neighborhood he had fallen in love with was becoming a prison, and Mark was starting to realize that Mrs. Thornfield had declared war on his family. Mark was working at his computer when he heard the mailman's truck stop outside. He didn't think much about it until he heard footsteps on his porch and then a loud knock on the door. When he opened it, the mailman was holding a thick envelope. "Certified. Mail for Mark Johnson," the mailman said. "You need to sign for this one." Mark signed the paper and took the envelope. His stomach dropped when he saw it was from the Maple Ridge Estates HOA legal department. The envelope felt heavy in his hands, like it contained something that would change his life. He sat down at his kitchen table and carefully opened it. Inside were several official-looking papers with lots of legal words he didn't understand. But the main letter was clear enough to make his hands shake. "Notice of intent to foreclose," the letter began in big, bold letters. Mark read the letter 3 times before the words really sank in. According to the HOA, he now owed $3,247.50 in unpaid fines, late fees, administrative costs, and legal fees. The letter said that if he didn't pay the full amount within 30 days, the HOA would begin the process of taking his house away from him. "This can't be real," Mark said out loud, his voice cracking. "They can't take our house." But as he read, through all the papers, he realized it was very real. There were copies of every violation notice he had received over the past 2 months. Each $50 fine had grown with late fees and interest charges. There were administrative fees for processing each violation. There were legal fees for preparing the foreclosure documents. Mark grabbed his calculator and started adding up the numbers. The original violations totaled only $650, but with all the extra fees and charges, the amount had grown to over $3,000. His phone rang. It was an unknown number, but Mark answered it anyway. "Mr. Johnson, this is Patricia, Wells from the HOA legal department. I'm calling about the foreclosure notice you received today." "Yes, I just got it," Mark said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I think there might be some mistake with the amounts." "No mistake, sir. All the fees are clearly outlined in your HOA agreement. You did sign an agreement when you purchased your home, correct?" Mark remembered signing dozens of papers when they bought the house. He had trusted the real estate agent and the lawyer to explain everything important. "Yes, but I never thought. The agreement gives the HOA the right to collect fees and fines through foreclosure if necessary," Patricia said in a cold, businesslike voice. "You have 30 days to pay the full amount, or we'll file the foreclosure paperwork with the county." "Can we work out a payment plan?" Mark asked. "I don't have $3,000 right now. The time for payment plans has passed, Mr. Johnson. You've ignored multiple notices and failed to address the underlying violations. The board has decided that immediate full payment is required." Mark felt like he couldn't breathe. "My wife is deployed with the Navy. She's serving overseas. Doesn't that matter?" "Military service doesn't excuse violation of HOA rules, sir. We've been over this before." The line went dead. Mark stared at the phone, then at the papers spread across his kitchen table. In 30 days, he could lose the house that he and Sarah had worked so hard to buy. Mark spent the rest of the day on his computer searching for information about HOA foreclosures. What he found made him feel even worse. HOA foreclosures were common and often successful. Even if homeowners owed small amounts of money, the HOAs could take their houses and sell them to pay the debts. He found story after story of families who had lost their homes over a few $100s in HOA fines. In many cases, the houses were sold for much more than the debt, but the families got nothing back. The HOA kept all the money from the sale. Mark called 3 different lawyers. The first one wanted a $2,500 retainer just to look at his case. The second one said HOA cases were difficult and expensive to fight. The third one told him that most people just paid the fines because fighting the HOA cost more than the original debt. "But it's not fair," Mark told the third lawyer. They're targeting me because my wife is in the military. Fair doesn't matter in court, the lawyer said. What matters is what you signed when you bought the house. If you agreed to the HOA rules, they have the right to enforce them. Mark hung up feeling completely hopeless. He had less than $3,000 in their savings account, and that money was supposed to last until Sarah came home from deployment. If he paid the HOA, they would have nothing left for emergencies or unexpected bills. That evening, Mark walked around the neighborhood, looking at all the houses where his neighbors lived peacefully. He saw Mr. Peterson's truck in the driveway, the same violation that had cost Mark $50. He saw Mrs. Chen's flower garden with bright red roses, colors that were probably just as disruptive as his yellow marigolds. None of these people had gotten violation notices. None of them were facing foreclosure. Only Mark was being punished, and he was starting to understand why. When he got home, Mark sat in his living room and looked around at everything he and Sarah had worked so hard to achieve. Their wedding photos on the mantel, Sarah's Navy uniform hanging in the closet, the small garden they had planted together before she deployed. All of it could be gone in 30 days. Mark picked up his phone to call Sarah, then put it down again. It was the middle of the night where she was, and he didn't want to wake her up with bad news. But he knew he couldn't hide this from her much longer. He tried calling her at her usual time, but she didn't answer. He tried again an hour later, and again an hour after that. Finally, at almost midnight, his computer made the sound that meant Sarah was calling him. "Hey, honey," Sarah said when her face appeared on the screen. She looked tired and stressed. "Sorry I missed your calls. We had some equipment problems today and I've been working late." Mark looked at his wife's face on the computer screen. She was thousands of miles away, serving their country, trusting him to take care of their home. How could he tell her that he was about to lose everything they had worked for? "Mark, you look terrible," Sarah said. "What's wrong?" Mark took a deep breath. He couldn't hide this anymore. "Sarah, we need to talk. Something bad has happened with the HOA." Sarah's expression became serious. "How bad?" Mark held up the foreclosure notice so she could see it on the camera. "They're trying to take our house." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, reading the document through the pixelated video connection. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, harder, more like the military officer she was. "Mark, I need you to scan all of those papers and email them to me right now. Don't talk to anyone from the HOA. Don't sign anything. Don't pay anything. Do you understand me?" "Sarah, what are you going to do?" "I'm coming home," she said simply. "But your deployment..." "Mark, they picked the wrong military family to mess with. I'm coming home and we're going to fight this thing." For the first time in weeks, Mark felt a spark of hope. Sarah was coming home and everything was about to change. Sarah's voice was calm but deadly serious when she spoke through the computer screen. "Mark, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I'm going to request emergency leave to come home. This won't hurt my career. Military families have protections against this kind of harassment." Mark felt his heart racing. "Are you sure? I don't want to mess up your deployment." "They messed up when they decided to target a Navy family," Sarah said, her officer training showing in every word. "I've been dealing with bullies my whole military career. Mrs. Thornfield just made the biggest mistake of her life." Within 6 hours of their video call, Sarah had spoken to her commanding officer and explained the situation. Emergency leave was approved immediately. Her captain was furious when he heard that a military spouse was being harassed while his wife served overseas. "Take care of your family, Lieutenant Johnson," the captain had told Sarah. "The Navy takes care of its own." Sarah spent her last day on the ship researching everything she could find about HOA laws, military family rights, and previous cases where service members had been targeted. She made phone calls to military legal assistance offices and downloaded dozens of legal documents onto her laptop. Mark couldn't sleep the night before Sarah's flight home. He kept walking through the house, looking at everything they might lose. Their bedroom with the big windows Sarah loved, the kitchen where she planned to cook all his favorite meals when she returned, the small office where he worked, looking out at the neighborhood that had become his enemy. At 3 a.m., Mark's phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah. Landing at 6:45 a.m., don't pick me up. I'm renting a car. We have work to do. Mark was drinking his fourth cup of coffee when he heard a car door slam outside. He looked through the window and saw Sarah walking up their front walkway, wearing her Navy uniform and carrying a large. But this wasn't the same woman who had left for deployment 8 months ago. Sarah's posture was different. She walked like someone who was used to giving orders and having them followed. Her uniform was perfectly pressed and every button and badge was exactly where it should be. She looked like what she was, a United States naval officer who was not going to be pushed around by anyone. "Hey, beautiful," Mark said when he opened the door, trying to hug her. Sarah hugged him back, but Mark could feel the tension in her body. "We'll have time for reunions later," she said. "Right now, we have a war to fight." Sarah spread all the HOA documents across their kitchen table like she was planning a military operation. She had printed out dozens of pages of research during her flights home, and she organized everything into neat piles. "Okay, here's what we're dealing with," Sarah said, pointing to different stacks of paper. They violated at least 4 different laws. The Service Members Civil Relief Act protects military families from exactly this kind of harassment. They also violated fair housing laws by targeting us because of my military service. Mark watched his wife work. This was a side of Sarah he had never seen before. At home, she was gentle and funny and loved to watch romantic movies. But right now, she was every inch the military officer who had earned respect from sailors and commanders around the world. "I called the state attorney general's office from the airport," Sarah continued. "They're very interested in our case. I also contacted the Military Legal Assistance Office, and they're sending a lawyer to help us, for free." "What about the 30-day deadline?" Mark asked. Sarah looked up from her papers with a smile that made Mark feel sorry for Mrs. Thornfield. That deadline just became their biggest problem. Under the SCRA, they can't foreclose on a military family's home while the service member is deployed or for 90 days after they return. They broke federal law the minute they sent that notice. Sarah spent the rest of the day making phone calls. Mark listened to her talk to lawyers, government officials, and military advocates. Her voice never changed from the calm, professional tone she used, but Mark could hear the steel underneath every word. "Yes, sir, I'm Lieutenant Sarah Johnson, United States Navy," she would say to each person she called. "I'm dealing with an HOA that has been harassing my family while I was deployed overseas. I believe they violated federal laws protecting military families." That evening, Sarah put on her dress blue uniform, the formal Navy uniform with all her ribbons and medals. Mark had only seen her wear it a few times, usually for military ceremonies or special events. She looked absolutely stunning and completely intimidating at the same time. "Why are you getting so dressed up?" Mark asked. "Because tomorrow night is the monthly HOA meeting," Sarah said, adjusting her uniform jacket, "and Mrs. Thornfield is about to meet the real Mrs. Johnson." Sarah spent an hour getting ready, making sure every detail of her uniform was perfect. She polished her shoes until they gleamed. She arranged her ribbons in perfect rows. She practiced her speech in the mirror until every word was exactly right. "What are you going to say to them?" Mark asked. "I'm going to remind them who they're dealing with," Sarah said. "I'm going to explain the laws they broke. And I'm going to give them one chance to fix this mess before I make their lives very, very difficult." Mark had never been more proud of his wife. The woman who video called him every night from a ship in the middle of the ocean was also a trained military officer who knew how to fight battles and win wars. The next evening, Mark put on his best suit and Sarah wore her dress blues. They walked to the community center where the HOA meeting was held every month. Usually only about 10 people attended these meetings, mostly Mrs. Thornfield and her friends who liked to make rules for everyone else. But tonight was different. Word had spread through the neighborhood that the Navy wife was coming to confront the HOA. The small meeting room was packed with curious neighbors who wanted to see what would happen. Mrs. Thornfield was sitting at the front table with the other board members, looking smug and confident. She had probably been looking forward to this moment, thinking she could embarrass Mark and Sarah in front of the whole community. But when Sarah walked into that room in her full military uniform, Everything changed. Conversation stopped. People turned to stare. Even Mrs. Thornfield's confident expression flickered for just a moment. Sarah found 2 seats in the front row and sat down with perfect military posture. She didn't look around at the other people or acknowledge the stares. She simply sat there like the professional military officer she was, waiting for her turn to speak. Mark looked around the room and saw neighbors he recognized. Mr. Peterson was there sitting in the back with his arms crossed. Mrs. Chen had come looking worried. Even some people from other streets had shown up to watch. Mrs. Thornfield called the meeting to order, but her voice wasn't quite as strong as usual. "We have several items on tonight's agenda," she began, glancing nervously at Sarah. Sarah raised her hand. "Mrs. Thornfield, I believe you have some business to discuss with me first." The room went completely silent. The battle was about to begin. The community center had never been so quiet. 50 people sat in complete silence, all eyes moving between Sarah in her navy dress blues and Mrs. Thornfield at the front table. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Mrs. Thornfield cleared her throat and tried to regain control. "Mrs. Johnson, you're out of order. We have an agenda to follow, and your situation can be discussed at the end if there's time." Sarah stood up slowly, her uniform crisp and perfect. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the room. "My name is Lieutenant Sarah Johnson, United States Navy. I've been deployed overseas for the past 8 months, serving my country while my husband maintained our home according to all reasonable community standards." Mrs. Thornfield's face went red. "Being in the military doesn't give you special treatment, Mrs. Johnson. Everyone follows the same rules here." "You're absolutely right," Sarah said calmly. "Everyone should follow the same rules. But that's not what happened, is it?" Sarah opened a folder and pulled out a stack of photographs. She held up the first one so everyone could see. "This is my husband's car in our driveway on March 15th, the day you gave him a $50 violation. And this," she held up another photo, "is Mr. Peterson's truck in his driveway on the same day. No violation notice." Mr. Peterson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Several other neighbors started whispering. Sarah continued, holding up more photos. "Here's Mrs. Chen's red roses, which are just as colorful as our yellow marigolds. No violation. Here's the Martinez family's basketball hoop, which has been in the same spot for 2 years. No violation. Here's Mr. Williams's garden gnome, which is identical to ours. No violation." The room erupted in whispers. People turned to look at each other, realizing for the first time how unfairly the rules had been applied. "Mrs. Johnson, this is inappropriate," Mrs. Thornfield said, but her voice was shaking now. "You can't just come in here and—" "And what?" Sarah interrupted, her voice still perfectly calm but with steel underneath. "Expose the truth? Show evidence of selective enforcement? Prove that you targeted my family specifically because I'm in the military?" Board member Helen spoke up. "That's not true. We treat everyone fairly." Sarah smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. "Helen Morrison, you live at 342 Pine Street, directly across from our house. On April 8th, you called the HOA office to report that my husband put his trash can out at 5:30 p.m. instead of 6 p.m., 30 minutes early, which resulted in a $50 fine." Helen's mouth fell open. "How did you—" "I requested all HOA records under the Freedom of Information Act," Sarah said. "Very interesting reading. Would you like me to tell everyone how many times you've called to report violations by military families versus violations by other residents?" The room was deadly silent now. Mrs. Thornfield looked like she wanted to disappear under the table. Sarah pulled out another document. "This is the foreclosure notice you sent to my family while I was deployed overseas, serving my country. This notice violates the Service Members Civil Relief Act, which specifically protects military families from foreclosure while the service member is deployed." She held up another paper. "This is a copy of the complaint I filed with the state Attorney General's office yesterday. They're very interested in your pattern of harassment against military families." Mrs. Thornfield finally found her voice. You can't prove we targeted you because of your military service. Sarah reached into her folder again. Actually, I can. On moving day, you told my husband, and I quote, military service doesn't change anything. We expect all residents to maintain the same standards. 3 weeks later, you told him that military families sometimes think they don't have to follow the same rules as everyone else. She looked directly at Mrs. Thornfield. My husband recorded those conversations on his phone, by the way. Very clear audio. Mark blinked in surprise. He hadn't recorded anything. But Mrs. Thornfield didn't know that, and her face went completely white. Furthermore, Sarah continued, I've been in contact with 2 other military families in this neighborhood who moved away last year after similar harassment. They're willing to testify about your pattern of discrimination. Board member Robert spoke up nervously. Now let's not get carried away here. I'm sure we can work something out. Oh, we're going to work something out, Sarah said. Here's what's going to happen. First, all fines against my family will be dismissed immediately. Second, you will issue a written apology to be posted in the community newsletter. Third, you will implement new policies to ensure fair and equal enforcement of all rules. Mrs. Thornfield stood up, her face red with anger. You can't just waltz in here in your fancy uniform and make demands. This is our community. Sarah's expression didn't change. This is our community too. And you forgot something very important. I didn't just come here to complain. I came here to give you one chance to fix this mess before I destroy you. The room went completely silent. Sarah reached into her folder one more time. Yesterday, I contacted Channel 7 News. They're doing a story on HOA harassment of military families. The reporter is very interested in your case, Mrs. Thornfield, especially after I showed her the pattern of violations, the selective enforcement, and the illegal foreclosure notice. Mrs. Thornfield sank back into her chair like all the air had gone out of her. I also contacted the Better Business Bureau, the Department of Veterans Affairs, and 3 different military advocacy groups. Sarah continued. Oh, and my commanding officer was so interested in our situation that he's forwarding our case to the Navy's legal department. They have very good lawyers who specialize in protecting military families. Mr. Peterson stood up from the back of the room. I move that we dismiss all fines against the Johnson family and accept Mrs. Thornfield's resignation as HOA president. I second that motion, Mrs. Chen called out. All in favor? Robert asked quickly, clearly wanting to end this nightmare. Nearly every hand in the room went up. Mrs. Thornfield looked around the room at all the people who had just voted against her. Without a word, she gathered her papers and walked out of the meeting, Helen following close behind. After the meeting ended, dozens of neighbors came up to Sarah and Mark to apologize and welcome them properly to the community. Mr. Peterson shook Sarah's hand and told her she reminded him of the officers he had served under in Vietnam. You handled that like a true military professional, he said with admiration. Mrs. Chen brought them homemade cookies the next day. I'm so sorry we didn't stand up for you sooner, she said. We were all too scared of Mrs. Thornfield. As they walked home under the streetlights of Maple Ridge Estates, Mark took Sarah's hand. Thank you for saving our home. Sarah squeezed his hand and smiled. You protected our home while I was away, Mark. I just reminded them who they were dealing with. The next morning, Mark woke up in his own bed, in his own house, next to his wife. For the first time in months, Maple Ridge Estates felt like home, again. And everyone in the neighborhood now knew that military families weren't people you wanted to mess with.